Across the blood-soaked landscapes of the medieval world, an army marched not for survival, but for salvation. Cloaked in crosses and driven by divine fury, the Crusades unleashed not just war, but devastation that scorched continents and souls alike. This was no passing campaign. It was a seismic convulsion of faith, power, and vengeance that reshaped empires and erased entire populations. Beneath the banners of Christ, mercy withered. An atrocity took root. What followed was not merely conquest, it was judgment wrought by human hands. The Siege of Jerusalem, no mercy for civilians. It was July 1099. After a brutal, months-long campaign across the Levant, the Crusader army weathered, starved, and inflamed by a sense of divine mission reached the gates of Jerusalem. The city, held by the Fatimid Caliphate at the time, stood as both a symbol and a prize. For many Crusaders, it was the culmination of a sacred vow sworn years earlier in faraway Europe. But what followed was not a triumph of faith, it was a catastrophe of humanity. The siege lasted less than 2 weeks. By July 15th, the Crusaders had breached the city's defenses. According to the chronicler Raymond of Aguilars, the knights entered with chants of Deus Vult, God wills it, echoing through blood-soaked streets. Inside, panic reigned. Defenders and civilians alike sought refuge in sacred spaces. But the storm showed no mercy. The Al-Aqsa Mosque became a final redoubt for many, yet the massacre continued even there. Raymond described the scene with unflinching fervor. In the Temple of Solomon, men rode in blood up to their knees in bridle reins. The account is supported, though not without variations, by other chroniclers like Fulcher of Chartres and William of Tyre. Muslim, Jewish, and Eastern Christian sources paint a similarly harrowing picture. Though the numbers are debated, with estimates ranging widely, the core fact remains indisputable. Thousands of non-combatants were killed in what became one of the most infamous moments of the First Crusade. The Crusaders saw this not as cruelty, but as divine justice. Pope Urban II had framed the campaign as a holy purification, and many believed they were agents of that sacred cleansing. But in their zeal, they turned the holy city into a place of desolation. What was taken in the name of God was stained by the actions of men. Massacre at Marat al-Numan, cannibalism in the desert. In the winter of 1098, the Crusader army descended upon the Syrian city of Marat al-Numan. Weakened by hunger, disease, and months of relentless siege warfare, they had already endured unimaginable conditions. But what transpired here would cast one of the darkest shadows over the entire First Crusade, a moment when desperation crossed the line into historical infamy. The city, known then simply as Marat, was well defended and strategically positioned. After several weeks of siege, the Crusaders broke through its fortifications in early December. What followed was a massacre. While the precise number of casualties remains uncertain, contemporary sources agree that a significant portion of the population, combatants and civilians alike, was killed, but it was what occurred after the violence that shocked even some within their own ranks. According to the chronicler Radulf of Caen, a Norman priest who joined the crusade, the hunger among the Crusaders grew so extreme that our men cooked the bodies of the Saracens and devoured them. The Arab historian Ibn al-Athir echoed this grim accusation, reporting that the Franks boiled adult Muslims in cooking pots and impaled children on spits. These claims, horrifying as they are, appear in multiple sources from both Christian and Muslim perspectives. Modern historians remain cautious. While cannibalism is likely to have occurred among the most desperate Crusaders, it was not widespread across the entire army, nor was it officially condoned. Yet even if the scale remains uncertain, the fact itself is rarely disputed. This moment at Marat exposed the collapse of all moral and religious restraint when starvation drove men who claimed divine purpose into actions that defied all civilized norms. In the words of Fulcher of Chartres, what they did there was beyond all reckoning. Forced conversions and the sword. The Crusades were waged under the banner of holy war. But faith in this context was rarely a matter of personal conviction. It was often dictated by the sword. While many Crusaders believed they were liberating sacred lands, their actions frequently veered into religious coercion. Nowhere was this more evident than in the forced conversions that accompanied their military campaigns. Throughout the First Crusade and beyond, Non-Christian populations, particularly Muslims and Jews, faced a dire ultimatum in many besieged towns and cities: convert or die. Though not uniformly enforced across all regions or leaders, this approach was documented in several key encounters. After the siege of Jerusalem in 1099, for instance, while many were killed, others were reportedly spared if they agreed to baptism. In some cases, entire communities were compelled to embrace Christianity to preserve their lives and families. One of the most striking accounts comes from the Rhineland massacres of 1096, where Jewish communities were confronted by mobs of Crusaders in what was meant to be the prelude to their journey east. Chronicler Solomon Bar Simpson recorded that many Jews were given a single choice: accept baptism or face execution. Though some capitulated under pressure, others chose death over conversion, viewing it as a betrayal of their covenant. Not all Crusader leaders supported these tactics. Figures like Raymond IV of Toulouse and others were known to oppose coerced conversions, citing theological arguments that true faith cannot be forced. The Church itself had long debated the legitimacy of such conversions, often condemning them in theory but looking away in practice. The result was a legacy of trauma among persecuted communities, many of whom never returned to their homes. What was justified by some as a righteous mission became, for others, a devastating erasure of identity where belief was not offered, but demanded at the edge of a blade. Looting of Constantinople, Christian versus Christian in April 1204. The Fourth Crusade reached its catastrophic climax not in the Holy Land but in the heart of the Byzantine Empire. Constantinople, then the largest and wealthiest Christian city in the world, fell not to Muslim forces, but to the very Crusaders who claimed to defend Christendom. It was a moment of staggering betrayal, Christian turning sword against Christian in pursuit of gold. Glory and power. The original goal of the Fourth Crusade had been Egypt, seen as the strategic key to Jerusalem. But due to mounting debts to the Republic of Venice and a tangled web of Byzantine politics, the Crusader army was diverted. In 1203, they supported the restoration of the deposed Byzantine Emperor Isaac II and his son Alexios IV. But when internal resistance overthrew Alexios the next year, the Crusaders, unpaid and enraged, turned their fury on the city itself. On April 12, 1204, after days of siege, the Crusaders breached Constantinople's formidable walls. What followed was 3 days of uncontrolled looting and destruction. Priceless relics, icons, and manuscripts were stolen or destroyed. Churches were desecrated. Even the Hagia Sophia, the great cathedral of Eastern Christianity, was plundered. According to the historian Nicetas Choniates, Crusaders defiled the sacred altar and broke into the imperial tomb searching for gold. This wasn't simply a raid, it was a blow from which Byzantium would never fully recover. The Latin Empire was established in its place, but it was unstable and short-lived. More enduring was the rupture between Eastern Orthodox and Western Catholic Christianity, a division deepened by the actions of those who were meant to unite Christendom. Slaughter at Antioch, starvation, and brutality. Before Jerusalem was ever reached, the First Crusade was nearly broken at the walls of Antioch. This ancient Syrian city, once a vital center of early Christianity, became the site of one of the longest and most desperate sieges in Crusader history. From October 1097 to June 1098, Crusader forces surrounded Antioch, facing not only enemy resistance, but starvation, disease, and internal dissent. The city was held by the Seljuk Turks, led by Yagasian, who mounted a formidable defense. As the months dragged on, supplies ran dangerously low. Horses were eaten, leather was boiled. Corpses lay unburied outside the walls. The Crusaders' morale faltered and desertions rose. Chronicler Fulcher of Chartres described the suffering plainly. The famine was so great that many boiled grass, leaves, and animal skins to sustain themselves. When the city was finally betrayed from within in June 1098, the Crusaders stormed through the gates in a fury fueled by 8 months of agony. The capture of Antioch unleashed a wave of slaughter. Many of the city's inhabitants, both military and civilian, were killed in the chaos. Despite the religious overtones of the crusade, the rules of Christian chivalry and mercy were often abandoned in the heat of vengeance. Antioch was a crucible, a place where faith and desperation collided, and where survival came at the cost of mercy. The Siege of Jerusalem. A holy purification gone wrong. The Siege of Jerusalem in 1099 was one of the most pivotal moments in Crusader history, but also one of the most horrifying. When the Crusader army breached the city gates, it unleashed a brutal massacre on the city's inhabitants. In the name of God, the Crusaders saw themselves as carrying out divine justice, but in reality, they perpetuated a wave of violence that would forever stain their legacy. The streets ran red with blood as civilians and defenders alike were slaughtered. Historical sources detail the indiscriminate nature of the killings. The Crusaders massacred men, women, and children without mercy. The chaos was so great that the defenders of the city fled into the Al-Aqsa Mosque, only to be slaughtered there as well. The Crusaders' claim of bringing salvation to the Holy City was overshadowed by their brutality. The religious justification for atrocities, the Crusades were framed as divine missions, holy wars meant to reclaim the Holy Land from non-Christian rule. But what began as a religious cause often blurred the lines between faith and earthly ambitions. The idea that faith justified such acts of violence was widespread among the Crusaders, with many believing that their actions were ordained by God. This belief was embedded in the rhetoric of the Church, which portrayed the Crusades as a holy purification, a righteous mission to reclaim sacred land. Pope Urban II's call to arms in 1095 famously urged warriors to take back the cross and liberate Jerusalem. The goal was not only religious victory, but the salvation of the Crusaders' own souls. However, the atrocities committed during the Crusades reveal a different truth. What began as a war for salvation soon devolved into a series of brutal conquests that were driven as much by greed, revenge, and political power as by faith. The Crusaders' violence was not confined to Muslims. Jews and even fellow Christians were victims of the bloodshed. The Crusader legacy, faith, power, and destruction, the Crusades, while framed as a religious movement, became something far more complex. They were wars of conquest, driven by the desire for power, wealth, and vengeance. What was supposed to be a divine mission turned into a period of unspeakable violence that claimed the lives of thousands, if not millions, and altered the course of history. The legacy of the Crusades is one of contradiction. On one hand, they are remembered as a series of battles fought for the sacred cause of Christendom. On the other hand, the Crusaders' actions during their campaigns often betrayed the very ideals they sought to protect. What was meant to be a righteous cause ended in destruction, bloodshed, and the establishment of new empires built on violence. The Crusades are a reminder that faith, when combined with power, can become a tool for destruction. It raises a difficult question: can any cause, no matter how divinely inspired, ever justify the suffering caused by war? The legacy of the Crusades continues to echo through history, with their brutal actions still haunting the world centuries later.